Greetings, Major Newton and the MS4 class. My name is Cadet Preston, and I will be briefing you on the United States Africa Command. We've reached the agenda slide. The agenda slide gives us an outline of the presentation, everything that I will be discussing, and a little bit more during this presentation. History. All right, so the history of the U.S. Africa Command. So we have to start off by talking about February the 6th, 2007, is when President Bush, the Bush administration, they announced the creation of the U.S. Africa Command. Prior to U.S. Africa, the continent was divided among three commands. Okay, so U.S. Africa Command is actually the youngest, yes, it's the youngest command out of the 9. However, before U.S. Africa Command in 2007, there was the U.S. European Command, the U.S. Central Command, and U.S. Pacific Command. All three of these commands made up the U.S. Africa Command. It includes all African countries except Egypt, But the following year, October 1st, 2008, it became a standalone command. The DoD expects U.S. African Command to protect and to serve and to provide any assistance that the African states or regional organizations may need. That's the purpose of the U.S. African Command. There is a big problem with terrorist groups going over and forming and trying to rise up and take over countries. But in Africa, the United States, they're fighting against that because they have interest, or we have interest in Africa, and we have to protect those interests by any means necessary. HIV and AIDS in Africa. It really is sad, and it's a part of the history. All of this is a part of the history of the U.S. Africa Command, because we can't talk about the U.S. Africa Command and not talk about the history of the African people. In 2008, there were 22 million HIV positive Africans. That represents 67% of infected persons worldwide. HIV and AIDS is the leading cause of death on that continent. AOR map, or the area of responsibility. What you see here on the left, where on the previous, you see Africa when it was under the U.S. European Command. You see it when it was under the U.S. European Command. And you also see this little area here under the U.S. Pacific Command, under the U.S. Pacific Command. Now, and as you can see, the founding date, October 1st, 2008, at full operational capacity, you see the U.S. Africa Command. You see where it is now, and you see all the countries in Africa. You see they're under this new command now. They're no longer under the U.S. European Command. They're no longer under this command. And also the area of responsibilities, they have 15 countries in the West. They have 15 countries in the West, 13 countries they're responsible for in the south of Africa, 10 countries they're responsible for in the central Africa, 10 countries in the east of Africa, and 5 countries in the north of Africa. So that's 53 African countries that the U.S. Africa Command is responsible for. Command structure. So what you see here on the screen, you see a breakdown, of course. You see who's the commander, or at least you see that the commander is a general, and you see his subordinates, and you see their subordinates, and you see their subordinates. The present U.S. Africa Command is United States Marine Corps General Thomas D. Waldheiser, and the Chief Master Sergeant is Roman CZ Lopez, and he is affiliated with the United States Air Force, and he's the command senior enlisted leader, the headquarters chief of staff, which is the chief of staff to the commander. And that is Major General Todd D. McFerrin, and he's affiliated with the United States Army. Now we're going to talk about the PTCO. This is very interesting. This is the interesting stuff right here. We're going to talk about the partners, then we're going to talk about the threats, then we're going to talk about the challenges, and then we're going to talk about the opportunities that one may have in the U.S. Africa Command. So the partners. The partners in the U.S. Africa Command, they perform detailed planning. So that they ensure that all the planning, all the essential information, as such as the command and control, all of that is taken care of. They establish and they sustain relationships with all the partners under the U.S. Africa Command. So each partner is responsible to ensure that they have a wonderful and diplomatic relationship with one another. And each one of these partners, they're responsible for security in the U.S. Africa Command and threats, the things that's happening or the things that may have happened or may have happened in the U.S. Africa Command. AFCON wants a stable professional army for Somalia so they can be able to protect their own country. That's it. They want Somalia to be able to protect their own country, to protect their own people, so their people can fight for their people. Challenges that we face or that they face in U.S. Africa Command. Some of the challenges that they face is corruption. They face corruption. People are not honest. People are not doing what they need to do with funds or with food or with the necessary tools that the country may need to be successful. People are not doing what they need to do. They're using political power not for the people, but in some sense against the people. Diseases, we talked about that heavily. We talked about how HIV and AIDS is impacting so many people in Africa. Over 20 million people were affected the HIV AIDS virus. They were found positive in 2008. And we can imagine that that number has quadrupled maybe, I don't know, but we can imagine that that number has increased drastically. So some of the opportunities that we may have in U.S. Africa Command are the democratic institutions. We talked about the different types of programs that U.S. Africa Command has. The HIV prevention program, the youth and exchange program. We talked about those programs, and those are opportunities that they offer within the U.S. Africa Command, so individuals can have opportunities to maybe advance in education, to maybe advance in military training. We talk about some of those opportunities also. So those are some of the opportunities that they may have in those countries that they can take advantage of. Now we'll talk about the recent events and operations within the AOR or within the U.S. Africa Command. So the top African Command officials attend the State Department conference. These are some of the recent events. These are some of the things that the U.S. Africa Command has going on in their command. So you had some of the top officials attend the State Department conference. The commander of the U.S. Africa Command and the deputy for civil military engagement, they attended the U.S. State Department Chief Mission Conference in the nation's capital, which is in Washington, D.C., Washington, the District of Columbia. So the commander of the U.S. Africa Command had the opportunity to give some remarks while at the State Department conference. So, of course, he talked about the state of the U.S. Africa Command and what the command is doing in the future and what they're doing moving forward. Some of the things that they can look to see happening, to see some changes. So he talked about what's going on in U.S. Africa Command. The second bullet, Al-Shabaab degraded by U.S. federal government. 6 airstrikes that the U.S. has deployed on this particular terrorist group. The U.S., and that's just this year, that's just this month. They deployed an airstrike January the 2nd. They deployed an airstrike January the 6th. They deployed an airstrike January the 7th, January the 8th, January the 19th, and January the 23rd. Boko Haram attacks a Borno village, kills 4 farmers. They were regular farmers. They were out doing their work, doing their duties, what they do every day. And they ended up dead because of some people who decided to make a bad choice that day. In conclusion, the U.S. Africa Command focuses on war prevention and not war fighting. Please reach out to me. I will be more than happy to provide you with any information that you may need to better understand U.S. Africa Command. I am writing my email address on the screen, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at our president at students.alcorn.edu. I check my email daily. It comes to my phone. I'll be more than happy to talk to you, talk with you about anything in regards to the U.S. Africa Command. So just remember, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me through my email I display on the screen. Have a good one and stay motivated, stay up, and stay dedicated to Alcorn State University's Braves ROTC. Go Braves.